A few weeks ago, I saw this video from RealLifeLore that had a lot of problems in it, and it really bothered me. I wanted to make a video addressing some of the problems with it, but I was worried about coming off as someone trying to start drama, which is something I really don't want to do. But later I saw a video from Mr. Beat critiquing a Johnny Harris video, and it encouraged me to make this anyway because ultimately, countering false information and encouraging further research is never a bad thing. So I want to start by saying this video is meant for just that, correcting false information and not trying to start silly drama. Real Life Lore has made plenty of wonderful videos that I've enjoyed. I am also clearly not perfect and have made mistakes in my videos numerous times. What made me decide to counter this video was the fact that rather than it being just a typo here or a common misconception there, the entire premise of the video is simply a moot point based on pretty simple geopolitical research. People who tend to be in tune with global geopolitics would have easily noticed this with the video, but a lot of people who watch this video, and many of Real Life Lore's other similar videos, include hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who don't actively pay attention to geopolitics and rely on his videos for information. In the video titled, Why NATO's Biggest Weakness is Scotland, after an introduction explaining various problems facing the United Kingdom, it talks about the possibility of Scottish independence, and how if Scotland gained independence, NATO's entire strategy for countering Russia would fall apart.
A threat that can not only end up dissolving the entire country after more than 3 centuries of unity, but could also undermine NATO's entire strategy against the Russians in the event of a war.
Yeah, the whole operation apparently falls apart if Scotland leaves. Real Life Lore then does a decent job explaining why Scotland wants to gain independence, how it almost got it in 2014, and how it's currently trying it again, but their efforts are being blocked by the British government. I would say his summary of that was perfectly on the mark. However, he says their efforts are being blocked primarily because not only would it cause chaos for the United Kingdom, but the entirety of NATO. Why? Well, apparently the main NATO plan for defense against Russian submarines is something called the GIUK Gap, a zone between Iceland and Scotland where NATO vessels prevent Russian submarines from getting wider access to the open Atlantic, which would cause trouble should war break out. The video also briefly mentions the possibility of Northern Ireland possibly returning to Ireland, and so if both parts leave the UK, then whoa Nelly, we're really in trouble. Ignoring the fact that Northern Ireland, while yes, it's growing further apart from the UK slowly, isn't likely to join Ireland overnight, there's a big hole in this idea. Scotland doesn't want to leave NATO. Every major party in Scotland supports staying in NATO. While it is true that the party that supports independent Scotland, the SNP, historically wanted to stay out of NATO, they switched their stance all the way back in 2012 as party policy. You can find plenty of interviews from party leader Nicola Sturgeon affirming this. And since Russia's little adventure in Ukraine, they're certainly not changing their minds anytime soon. To be a little fair, there is a bit of the video discussing that if Scotland did want to stay in NATO, they'd still have to reapply, which could result in bureaucracy keeping them out for an unknown period of time, which is true. But most of the video operates under this idea that that's the most unlikely option, and that Scotland is more likely to somehow not rejoin NATO at all, which is simply not true. The video wasn't what if Scotland leaves NATO, or why Scotland is important for NATO. It seemed to have this vibe of, hey guys, Scotland keeps trying to leave NATO and it's gonna ruin everything. It kind of creates a false impression for the viewer. But okay, let's put that aside. Let's play devil's advocate and say that the video is a what-if scenario. Does the rest of the video hold up? No. There are many glaring, obvious holes that Real Life Lore doesn't even talk about during the video. Like mentioned before, the idea is Scotland leaving would cause the GIUK Gap to be open to Russian submarines because now Scottish waters would be free of NATO vessels, giving the Russians an opening. Here are a few holes to this. 1. The Faroe Islands. So, you may notice that this line representing the GIUK Gap goes over these islands right here. These are not Scottish-owned islands. These are the Faroe Islands, a part of the Danish realm. Like Greenland, they do have a level of self-rule, but effectively are defended and under the foreign policy decisions of Denmark, another member of NATO. NATO can operate their ships from here. While Scotland's water boundaries do appear to cover a lot of area, the Faroe Islands aren't exactly nothing for maintaining a gap in this area. Even if it wouldn't solve everything, I was just kind of surprised the video didn't even mention the islands at all a single time. 2. Norway. Just like the Faroe Islands, Norway is also a part of NATO, and there are bases there right now that NATO uses. You can have a new gap from Iceland to Norway to cover, which wouldn't be that much larger than the GIUK gap as it is. There's even a part later on in the video where RealLifeLore talks about the dangers of Russian saboteurs to underwater cables, and he shows a line that goes from Iceland to Norway that's above the gap. Well, that's even more of a reason to try a gap defense there instead. Now, the counter is, well, what about nuclear submarines? It's one thing for conventional naval forces, but what about nuclear subs? They can't just be based anywhere. Well, as it so happens, the US has been having their nuclear submarines not only patrol but dock along Norway for the past couple of years now. And there have already been plans set in motion for an outright US naval base in northern Norway that could host them in the immediate future, specifically for the purpose of combating Russian submarine activity. So we've already been moving past the GIUK gap as a defense line for the past few years. We're already moving away from it. Which leads to number 3. The GIUK gap wall is sort of outdated regardless. Obviously, the GIUK gap is an important transit route. There are reasons for NATO to defend it. But the idea that you need this wall here, it's a necessary rock-solid defense to prevent Russian submarines from getting through, is an outdated idea. To put it simply, the GIUK gap defense is a Cold War-era plan that does not hold the same weight as it used to. The whole point of the gap being defended, like some sort of wall to block Russian ships, was to prevent important locations further west from being within range of Russian missiles. But by modern standards, Russia doesn't need to violate the gap to be within range of most targets anymore. While this space would need to be defended should war break out, Scotland leaving NATO wouldn't really change the situation as it is now, because Russians are violating the gap all the time. Even geopolitical publications arguing the gap's significance acknowledge that this idea of some sort of indefensible wall there needs to be changed anyway. It needs to evolve. 4. Scotland can just make a deal with NATO to let them use their bases. Now, there is an issue over the Trident nuclear deterrent system based in Scotland, and it is true that an independent Scotland would want them out. But for other military necessities NATO might need in Scotland, if it really takes years for Scotland to reapply to NATO, they can just lease their bases in the meantime. Not only would that economically benefit them as a new nation, but it's something NATO does all the time. We have major non-NATO allies where NATO members locate military bases in non-NATO territory that they can operate out of. It's how NATO was able to participate in Afghanistan. Scotland wouldn't immediately have a ready defense system upon leaving anyway, so there's simply no reason Scotland wouldn't allow conventional NATO access to military bases there if it was really that necessary. The video sort of acknowledges this as a possibility, but says it's near impossible because it's assuming that the Trident system is the only thing that NATO could use there. As for the Trident system itself, while Scotland wants it gone, I don't see why it would be impossible for some sort of deal where it stays for a few years until the UK would have another base built somewhere else anyway. I think especially after Brexit, everyone understands that things don't just separate overnight anyway. There would be a transition period upon Scotland leaving that would set things up over a period of time, probably longer than the period of time it would take for Scotland to reapply and join NATO anyway and make it a moot point. Also, on another note, the bases at Fastlane and Coalport are not in remotely sparsely populated areas like you said.
The area around Fastlane is remote and sparsely populated, far removed from any prying eyes.
They're next to the most populated area of Scotland, including less than 30 kilometers away from the large city of Glasgow. Basically, to conclude things, this whole video is an alarmist take over something that is not only assuming a very unlikely scenario of Scotland wanting to stay out of NATO upon independence, but also an issue that already has multiple obvious solutions. NATO has already been moving ahead of this problem anyway. To paraphrase a comment left by a viewer on the video, it's like you're assuming Scotland leaving would create some Korea scenario between them with the rest of the UK when it really wouldn't be. Considering NATO was already moving past this problem as of a few years ago, it felt very unnecessary to make a 24-minute video on such a thing. While I did want to focus on correcting this video, I do want to add a little bit at the end of this for real life lore. You make great graphics and present a lot of information that not only can educate people about geopolitics, but do it in a very effective way. It's very important, and I respect that. A lot of people take your content seriously, and a video this sloppy will either misinform a lot of people or damage your own reputation. I've already seen several people dismiss your channel altogether over this video alone, and you don't deserve that. So I hope you continue making good videos and don't make another one like that one. Also, one final petty remark, you got Scotland's borders wrong on the thumbnail and it really bothered me. Bye!